My name is Jim Berg, and I'm a member of the OCAMPR board and Dean of the College of Professional Studies at Purdue University in Fort Wayne. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Popa. She has presented many times at OCAMPR on internal family systems, and it's a treat to have you here again. Ioana Popa is a psychiatrist in private practice, a counselor, and adjunct assistant professor at Hellenic College, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline. She'll be presenting today on True Self and the Healing Presence, Christ as the Healer's Archetype in Spiritual Interventions using Internal Family Systems and Psychosynthesis. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to be back. Today, I want to present on Christ as Healer's Archetype and what does that tell us about spiritual intervention and any intervention in general as in various settings. And there's also going to be experiential things that we're going to do. So if you're thinking of just having a presentation where for an hour you're just going to listen to me talking, this might not be the best workshop to be in. It'll be fun, hopefully. But my interest is what happens in healing encounters. And, doctors, psychologists, therapists, nurses, priests, chaplains, every caregivers, what is it that happens that can bring hope in people in need? And much has been written, of course, about the role and function of each vocation. And there's obviously secular ethical standards have been developed in each towards establishing professional, all sorts of vocational guidelines. But as Christians, I think there's much that can be learned from Christ and the way he interacted with the world in his healing ministry. And in this workshop, I want to use the foundation of Christ the Healer as an archetype, and also to discern the different true self elements, true self as opposed to false self, which is used a lot in psychology, and about his presence and the healing impact that can have in interventions. I wanted to start with, this is the outline. Let me see if I get this work. We'll review first different psychological models, and I'm gonna use a couple of slides that I used last year. I promise it won't be I won't keep it too long. But then we're gonna review also briefly internal family system and psychosynthesis with a focus on the healing presence. And since I presented on that before, and especially internal family system is gonna be very brief as well. And then really looking at uniqueness of Christ. I'm always, in a healing profession, we always hear about all sorts of teachers and religion and people trying to be really inclusive, and Christ is just one more teacher along the way. But there are things very unique about his presence. Of course, we know that, and how to discern that and how to bridge that forward, and also look at him as a healer, as a prototype, and then we'll do some experiential exercises. I had the honor to teach in high school and also in college psychology, and I've been fascinated with the multitude of psychological threads. And one of the things that I've noticed, and it was just so amazing that Dr. Renos was talking about those things as well, that in many psychological threads, the healer's position is of an expert. We are there to tell the person what to do. They usually identify deficits or needs that need to be corrected or fulfilled, and the healer, or that whatever that capacity is, we have to do something to the patient, or there's nothing else to do. And those psychological threads, starting with Freud, talking about psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy, which they focus on internal psychic structure, behavioral psychology, they focus on conditioning, external conditioning, cognitive psychology, they all focus on cognition, emotional-based therapies, they focus on emotion. It's all about emotions, if we can only change that. Humanistic psychologies, they look at self-actualization. Attachment theories, family system, imago therapy, they focus on relationship. And with attachment, you know, if you haven't had those attachments early on, you're kind of done for life. Biological psychiatry, they're all looking at what's happening in the brain, neurotransmitters, let me give you the pill. And being a psychiatrist, I've been at that end, you know, with visits of 15 minutes. How's your sleep? How's your appetite? Go up and down on the medication, and I'll see you in a month. There's hope and there's importance to all of those approaches. But I think what's different is everyone is trying to see their point of view and kind of bring that at the forefront and imagine that this is the only way of healing. And I wish they'll have the Orthodox ethos, you know, diversity and unity, where it can see the bigger picture, and there's all parts of this. Now, I've also encountered other types of psychological threads, and those are more described sometimes as transpersonal psychologies. Those types, the position, the healer position is different. He's not the expert. He is more the guy, the collaborator. There's a synergy that Dr. Renos was talking about, and there are several models on that as well. And there's something about this that at the core of each human, there is something unknowable, something mysterious. Now, they're not theologians, right? But they discovered as you go into that depth that there's something there that's unknowable, and that kind of matches our apophatic theology. And also the healer, in the healer's position, again, I use this word in general, a very wide range, is helping the other accessing this healing presence internally. So therefore, there's the collaboration. And I'm not necessarily covering all the types of psychological threads, but in those arenas, you might have heard of death psychology and Jungian psychology, where this idea that there is an unconscious and it's possible that God is, seating of God is somewhere in there. Internal family system, they have this possibility there's a true self at the core that is not a part of us. It's actually something, again, unknowable, but it's always there, that's untouched, unharmed, that is calm and compassionate. They can bring healing. Psychosynthesis, they look at the possibility of the relationship with the divine through accessing psychic integration and different psychological functions. We know about mindfulness-based therapies. You know, some of them are more, they don't necessarily include a religious belief, but some they do. They have this possibility of healing through accessing universal compassion and awareness. So with all that, I've been particularly interested in a couple of them. I've been trained, I'm internal family system trained and certified and did all the levels and assisted in trainings, and the same for psychosynthesis. So I'm going to talk just briefly about that, but this is my visual image about all those psychological threads. You know, they're all human concepts. They're kind of landing on something that is there, and there's an overlap, but there is no theology, of course. It's secular developments, but if Christ is at the center, kind of Christ holding everything, once it resonates with that, we know we're there. And I'm sure this conference, we're hearing a lot about many therapeutical modalities and interventions, and when we're hitting that, when God is there, healing happens, and we know it. So let's review just a little bit. What are the internal family system saying about the presence, this true self, this potential divine presence, and what psychosynthesis is saying? Interestingly, internal family system developed by Dr. Dick Schwartz, he talks in his presentation, he was an atheist when he did this, and he was just very curious. In all of his methodologies, he just encountered roadblocks until he kind of gave up and said, you know what, I'm just going to listen to my patients and just listen well. And then he discovered that there are different parts, psychological parts, but also that there was something at the core that was inexplicable. that he called it true self, and all this ability will heal the different parts, where there's calmness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, creativity, courage, and connectedness. And of course, we picked up 8 qualities. They all start with C. Coming from a different culture, this seems kind of a strange. I wondered if it would be in a different language, how this will pan out. But nonetheless, those are the qualities. I like to equate many times compassion more with love, but that's where I'm coming from. But this idea that all those are psychological parts in the right relationship with true self, and I will shift that into Holy Spirit, God, the image of God, that there is a transformation and then there's healing. Similarly, when I see patients, clients, that's what I see. I see the image of God in there. From a psychosynthesis point of view, and I believe this started early on, in the mid 20th century in Italy. Dr. Saggioli was a psychiatrist, and there's overlap between those two theories. This idea that there is healing that's going to happen through psychological integration, and we have different psychological functions. They talk also about subpersonalities as parts, and I like it. They talk about how to disidentify. They're a very practical way that we can disidentify for those psychological functions and really access a sense of presence. And this presence, it's a way of being, is a way of healing and openness that what I would have some time to even practice is that when there's compassion, with the listening. And from an Orthodox Christian perspective, I'm thinking of emptying oneself. We're emptying ourselves to the story, to the experience of the other. We stay in the mystery. And with a term that sometimes it's used is kenosis for that. Now, as I've been trained in all sorts of, almost all, not all, but many modalities, I've been always struck by 2 attitudes in general about faith. Either people that I interact with, there were many healers or therapists, they do recognize Christ. They say it's a major prophet or teacher in the list of many of them, and trying to kind of pacify all truths. There's this sense of acceptance. If I'm going to accept the other, the only mindset that I can have is that all the religions are kind of equal. And other times I'm experiencing people having particular faith beliefs, but they either don't engage in them, they kind of keep them really private, or if they discuss, it's kind of a circular kind of conversation, well, this is my truth versus your truth. So I had to really, people ask me all the time, and how can I still be a believer? How can I still have a strong faith and I want to go to church? And really think about what is so different than Christ versus in this kind of argument that all our teachers and all are great and let's really honor them all, which makes sense from a humanistic position. But from a Christian and psychological perspective, Christ is indeed unique. From a theological perspective, I mean, the good news, the tomb is empty. So what does that mean? That he has this ability of conquering death. So healing involves this is an ultimate healing that goes through suffering or death, that there is a different healing paradigm that has never been expressed in humanity. There's no other teacher that actually died and claimed to be resurrected. And interesting psychologically though, well, you could say, well, this was a story. Well, he could be, but Christ clearly did not try to establish a trend to become, he wasn't trying to have a movement to become a guru or whatever. He was not popular, and actually his death arose great fear and denial, including people who followed him. I mean, the apostles kind of, their defense mechanism and protective reactions were all triggered and they all scattered. So how to explain that? What helped to overcome normal social reactions against the fear of death for the church actually to come back together? Something happened. There was no other individual, social, psychological explanation for that of believers coming together. So he clearly, something happened. He resurrected, and the Holy Spirit really moved people to come together and to develop the church. With that, I'm always going back to Christ. What did Christ do? What he would do in different healing interactions? What can we learn? I mean, there's so much in different professions. They're telling us, well, we have to do this technique, that technique, or you have to have this standards. So part of that, I've been looking and studying the different types of healing. And as I looked through them, someone mentioned earlier today there were 26. I think that's about it. And I looked through the different Gospels and kind of looking, my thinking part likes to classify things. So I said, what kind of healings and how do I really understand them, even from as a physician? I would say there are general healings, and we will see in many of the Gospels where Christ there are depictions of him healing multitudes by the sea in the evening. There are specific healings in the gospel where specific body disorders, where the will and the consciousness of the person seems preserved. They're not affected. And we're going to focus on this one, the second one. But there's also healing of general body diseases when there's little or no consciousness or will. For example, the depiction with Peter's mother-in-law when she had a fever, or paralytic. It's not clear paralytic. I think it can go to both, so I'm going to bring it also in a for second category. There's also healings of demoniacs, where from a spiritual point of view, it almost seems that there is no will. If the person is overcome by something, there's no consciousness or will. And we have the healing of the demoniac in the synagogue, the one in the tomb with the swine, healing of the boy possessed by spirit. When the father is really exasperated because the boy is throwing himself in the fire, water. There's also healing healing encounters when there's death. 21st century, someone will say, well, those could be near-death experiences. There's actually a very interesting study that has been done by a nurse about that. And that's the story in the Bible, the story of the widow with the son, Anan, and Jairus' daughter. And also there's a depiction of healing at a distance. So kind of looking through that, and there is probably topic here to expand on many other levels, but just for different spiritual interventions, I just wanted to focus a little bit on healing on specific body disorders. And those are the 4 ones that I'm just going to focus before we draw some conclusions when we try something experientially. The first one I want to talk about is leprosy, and just kind of look at what was Christ's position in interacting. Then also healing the man with the withered hand, the woman with hemorrhage, and the healing of the paralytic. And I have here the different references from which Gospels are coming from. Let me start with cleansing the leper. There are several accounts. One is one, and one there's several. But the one when Christ, I'm going to focus on the one when he encounters one leper. He starts asking Christ to make him clean. And it's very interesting. He said, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. So the leper from the start it almost comes across not putting any pressure on Christ, but acknowledge his free will. And this brief exchange is packed, almost you sense the respect and the dignity in the interaction and respect of each other's free will. And Jesus in turn accepts this invitation and makes the leper clean. And Mark's add that Jesus even was moved with pity with him. And at the end, Christ admonishes the cleansed leper not to say anything to anyone, but to show himself to the priest. And this is striking to me for a couple of reasons. From a psychological point of view, it's clear that Christ's healing gestures was not to fulfill his own ego or his own need for self-worth or whatnot. And as human healers, when we experience great success in our work, we can feel an urge or a pull towards recognition. And that's just a natural kind of human reaction. And we have a much needed modern confidentiality law, right? We cannot break that. And kind of puts a break to this natural desire to be affirmed and recognized for our good works. But really, Christ emptied himself and performed this amazing acts of healing without any personal benefit. He simply responded to the simple but heartfelt request from the leper. And not only he healed the man, but he truly respected the Jewish tradition, which at that time when you were healed, you were asked to go to bring yourself to the priest as Moses commanded. So it's so much more significant that Christ's gesture had no constraints to confidentiality to block this natural tendency, and then he just said that. No, don't say that to anyone. Like how many times we see leaders in any capacity nowadays, right, and across centuries, that they build their success and let the world know of their deeds in order to impress others, and there's none of that. So in our turn, as we do our deeper work, internal healing, we can befriend those natural impulses as well and help transcend them, not just because we have to. Also, Christ models for us in that interaction the process afterwards. After the healing process, Christ separated himself from the people he healed in order to regenerate. And then he withdrew, quote, to the wilderness and he prayed. And in a similar way, and I've presented this last year about the benefit of separating physically and emotionally after healing encounters or any caregiver encounters in order to regenerate and not burn out. Now, the next one, the man with the withered hand, this encounter, Christ is in the synagogue, and the Pharisees actually questioned him about rules of healing in order to test him. They were not really interested in the healing aspect, but Christ seeks out the man with the withered hand and invites him to be healed. So this time the healing is prompted by Christ's desire to correct the underlying assumption of the time, the association of healing with works, which work, of course, was forbidden on the Sabbath. So this new story, this new deeper meaning of healing, it's thus restored. It's more of an act of mercy, grace, restoration of human dignity and completeness, and not just a to-do or something we put on a to-do list. And in Luke, it's actually apparent that Christ is aware that the scribes and the Pharisees, this is a trap. So they were watching him. So another interesting element to this is Christ's courage to do the right thing, knowing fully well possible consequences. So that's a great model for us also as healers and an inspiration that sometimes things that we do, they're not going to be necessarily well received. The third one we're looking today is the woman with the hemorrhage. And in this miracle, the woman is aware of their desire to be healed, but Christ as a healer actually is not. The healing occurs spontaneously, and Christ, it's almost as if Christ cannot help himself but heal others just by the nature of who he is. And the woman's dialogue is this: if I touch even his garments, I shall be made well. And how great was her faith and hope. So in those times, she had a double burden of having no rights. On one hand, she was a woman, and barely being a woman, they had no rights. And on the other hand, she was considered the most unclean of the unclean because of the bleeding. So Christ, interestingly, in hindsight, of course, we're not surprised by Christ's response. He was very compassionate, but at the time, this was quite shocking because she was untouchable. So first, Christ is aware that someone touched him and the power came out of him. And then his response is full of compassion and filled with grace, and there was no sense of anger or barrier and whatnot. There was no judgment, no repulsion coming from Christ. So Christ really exemplifies openness, respect to all humankind for the dejected of the time. And I always think, okay, but how about now? How about in 21st century? who are the dejected in our society right now, and how are we responding to that? Could we embody that compassion and fearless courage? And what would that look like in our place where we live? Another point out of this is that we talk about the will and the hope and the interest of the patient. If they want to be healed, it really makes a difference as opposed to help rejection. That's very important. And also, in IFS, where internal family system work, is a careful attention given to the will of each part, internal part, and in connection to the true self. So there's also a recognition to the dignity, not only of the person, but also of the parts that are made in the image of God. And I'm also curious about placebo effect. When we talk nowadays about, this is placebo effect, kind of in science is a little put down, it's one of those things we can think we get better. Well, what if this is because of faith? Faith, we're getting better. So it's not talked about, the faith of the person who's actually seeking help. She had faith, and it was really had an impact. And the third point I want to make about this, it's really subtle, but it appeared that almost like Christ's human awareness was lagging behind his godly healing ability. Like he was not aware that this happened and just aware that power came out of him. And the subtle distinction, I think, models for us healers in a unique way. There is no need to always be aware of all the implications and consequences of our healing actions and words. As long as we allow ourselves to be the vehicle of God's providence and healing power, so it speaks about the faith of the healer in the process, and that things can happen if we are aware of not. And how many times we have made an intervention and we had no idea, and then we hear later, we meet a person or something happens and we're like, wow, I had this impact in your life, I've had no clue. So faith seems important not only for the one who's healed, but also for the healer. And in other parts of the Bible, Christ talks about faith, especially actually when he talks about healing the boy possessed by spirit. So I'm digressing a little bit, but I just want to bring the three metaphors of faith that he uses that can inspire us in our work. One is the metaphor of, truly I say to you, if you have faith as a grain of the mustard seed, you say to this mountain, move here, and there's going to move, and nothing will be impossible to you. I wonder how will this look in our work if we really believe that. The second beautiful metaphor is moving a mountain into the sea by faith. And this is in Matthew and Mark. And you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it will be done. And the third metaphor is Luke's, the parable has to do with the sycamore tree. Be rooted up and be planted into the sea, and he'll obey you. There's such majestic and awe-inspiring metaphors about how faith look like, and how little do we actually need, the mustard of seed. Now, moving on to the last healing encounter that I'm addressing today is the healing of the paralytic. There are encounters in all Gospels. In the three synoptic Gospels, the story goes in a very similar way with a paralytic. And there is a question where the community actually brings the paralytic through the roof, and Christ did encounter them. And there's the question, the Pharisees are there also, and they're really challenge him again. And Christ's response is, which is easier to you? Your sins are forgiven, or take up your bed and rise? It is easy to think of forgiving sins many times just from a spiritual perspective, but I think this points also to the importance of connection between mind and soul and the body connection, the bidirectionality, that it's not just spiritual healing, physical healing. And it's been true in my work with internal family system that many actually of our parts are also rooted in the body, and they can come up. And this is not just in IFS. I mean, the many, psychosomatic medicine is dealing just with that. This idea that there is strong connection between our emotions, our thoughts, and our bodies, and vice versa. And here Christ was doing just that. The other important thing in this encounter to me was striking that this healing was prompted actually by the community. It was not, the story doesn't go with the paralytic asking for help. I'm talking about the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But they bring him to, the community brings him to Christ, and then Christ asks, what do you want, or what do you need? Do you want to be healed? So then there is also this intention and desire for healing from the community. And the people around the paralytic went actually to great lengths, to remove the roof, to go down, if I've got in a class really understanding even the structure of the house looked like. It was pretty complex to do all that. And the community really, this is what moved Christ. And everyone, as they brought forth, healing happened. And reminds me of our work, not just at our workplace, but also in church and our sacramental life, when the entire community is praying. Like there's something really deep that could happen through that, through the prayers of our entire community. In John's Gospels, though, interestingly, there is a story of a paralytic. Is by the pool now, but interesting that although he's surrounded by people, it almost seems, reading through the lines, that the community didn't quite care. Like this man was there for years and years and years, and no one actually put him in the water, and he's keep waiting for that moment. So everyone else seemed concerned with their own healing, and there was no compassion coming from him. So in this time, Christ really reaches to the paralytic in his usual fashion, and he doesn't say, it's always in his interaction, Christ never says, oh, I'll heal you. He always asks, do you want to be healed? What do you want? What do you need? There's an invitation, and there's that synergistic movement that happens, as opposed to, oh, I know what you need. You have a withered hand. Here you go, and it'll fix that. So in this case, the paralytic really responds to that, and Christ healed him with the same command that is in the other Gospels: do rise, take up your pallet, and walk. And interestingly, in the Synoptic Gospels, when the community really wanted him to be healed, there was a sense, there was noted, they were amazed. You see their responses, but in John there's no mention of that. Probably the crowd didn't even notice. Now, with this, what are some of the lessons for the healers? What I'm sensing in all of them, there's an engagement of the free will. There's always an asking, do you want to be healed? What do you want? There's a sense of do not tell others, letting go of ego, not taking credit. There's a need to regenerate. Christ really separates from the healing and to find, to complete the cycle of healing and prevent burnout in a way. Healing is seen as an act of mercy, grace, restoration of human dignity. There's something very touching. He's always seeing something beautiful in the other. There's a tenderness, also compassion towards human needs and longings when he's asking that, what do you need? And there's an interconnection between body and soul as well, that it's clear. And also, I'm noticing the courage against the rules or the laws of the day. He did the right thing. The stress on faith of the healed one, faith of the healer, faith of the community. And the two last points, which are kind of intricated with the presentations, is that the healing happens in relationships. And this is not unheard of in psychological world. I mean, when they've tried different psychotherapy, there's a study, they've tried all sorts of psychotherapy modalities, and the only thing that finally at the end, or the core, was the relationship. That the relationship between the patient or client and the therapist was the one that actually made the most change, as opposed to the different therapeutical approach. And the other element is the emptying oneself and love one another. And that's the trickiest one to do. I mean, I can say to myself, okay, I'm going to just empty myself. I'm just going to be present. thoughts run through our head 24/7. They come, as Father Thaddeus is saying, like clouds in the sky. Emotions come. Our beliefs are so subtle, we don't even recognize them. As Dr. Renos was saying earlier, right, with the epistemology, that we're not even aware the kind of the subtle cultural family beliefs that we're having. So what does that look like to be really empty? Are we really empty in ourselves and really hearing the others, or do we have different beliefs? We're always going to have something. But there are ways to facilitate that and make it a little more open and more explicit. And I would say with the internal family system and psychosynthesis, there is a way to really disidentify, or IFS will say unblend, from the different parts. There is way, they're very subtle. We have very subtle shifts in our consciousness. We don't even know it. We think it's always I holding the microphone, but actually there are many reactions that can hold a microphone in our internal world. And the transition is very subtle. So, for example, we can be just fine, and all of a sudden get really hungry. We're very subtly going to start thinking about food, right? And we don't even notice the transition. So those transitions are very, very subtle. But they do, the psychosynthesis and IFS are more proactive in identifying that and finding really practical way to disidentify from them. So with that, we have the possibility now to do some exercises just for a couple of minutes. I have a few of them. One just for maybe 5-7 minutes or 10. We'll see how long it'll take, and depending on that, we'll move into the second exercise. But there's a way, when our faith, this Orthodox faith, talks a lot about Jesus' prayer and how to really descend our thoughts into our heart. What does that mean? And how to really open our heart in a way that feels open, that feels really open to God, opens to the other. So I have an exercise that we could do in watchfulness or contemplation that we can try to disidentify it with a few things. So are we all on board with that? So here's the choices. I'm really excited, I want to try this. Not sure. I'd rather hit my thumb in a car door than do this right now. So what's the mood here? Okay. So as we try this, we can do, you can keep your eyes open, you can keep your eyes closed. If you keep your eyes open, it's better sometimes to look a little down, not to get distracted. So just let's sit down. As you sit down, just find a comfortable position. And sometimes it helps to have a comfortable position with your back straight. Allow for better breathing. So we will do a few prompts, and then at some point we'll say the Jesus prayer. And I would say at any point, whatever I'm saying, if it feels right to you, follow. If not, just throw it out the window. I know there's no windows here, but in our imaginary window. So as you sit comfortable, notice just for a few moments that, there are windows. There are a lot of them. Okay, so this is a part of me, right, that just came in, my humorous part, and kind of got me distracted. All right, so let's take some deep breath as you sit. I'm going to sit as well in a comfortable position. And then let's take some deep breath and just notice for a few moments that actually nothing is happening. There's no problem to solve. There's no task at hand. And actually the chair, the floor, the earth is doing all the work right now, supporting us. There's really nothing we have to do. Just take some deep breath really deliberately. Breath of God, just coming in our body, regenerating us. And let's do a quick body scan. We'll try to quiet our body first by just noticing our body. with awareness from inside. Just notice the liveliness of your body. Maybe there's some touch points. Maybe you have some pain or tension. What if for a moment there's nothing to do about that? We don't have to change it. You can just observe it and be aware. And just notice sensations with no judgment. And just be aware of that you have sensations, but you are not your sensations only. Notice that you have a body, but you're not just the body. And if it feels right to send some gratitude to our bodies and invite it to relax even more. And as you take some deep breath, maybe saying a Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And just notice that all of us, we have thoughts. They go 24/7 except we're sleeping. Sometimes not even then, they quiet. Just notice your thoughts like clouds in the sky. What if for a few moments you don't have to engage in the content? Just notice them. And just notice that you have thoughts. But you're not only your thoughts, you're more than that. And just notice the space that's holding you and your thoughts. And keep taking a few deep breaths. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Sending gratitude to your thoughts. And just send an invitation for them to relax as well. With no pressure, no agenda, just being. And you might notice feelings. Ask yourself, what feeling am I experiencing right now? You can just name it for yourself. Maybe no feeling whatsoever. And just notice that you have feelings, but we're more than our feelings. And notice the space that's holding them as well. Sending gratitude for them. We need them. They warn us. Anger, anxiety, joy, happiness, disgust, fear. They're just warning. They're signals. They come and go, like the thoughts. And as you breathe, just invite God as breath or Jesus prayer even more. Just make that invitation. We can only be open to the grace of God. And the grace of God is going to do what He's going to do. But we can be present. So just inhale God, and you can even imagine exhaling any burdens or hurts, and just find your rhythm. In being who you are, and in the same time, more. And as we're going to transition back in a minute, Notice that we don't have to do this abruptly. There's a way to come open and close and be aware of the inside and the outside in the same time. So just experiment that with yourself. Just open if you had it closed and close again. See if you can be connected both with your breath and a sense of who you are inside while you're aware of the outside. Maybe this is what some of our ancestors talk about, praying incessantly. And just start transitioning to the room. Maybe wiggle your feet, your hands. Just keep opening up slowly. And as you transition out, see if there's a word or a couple of words that could describe what you're experiencing that you could share with the group. Peace. Presence. Anyone else? Restfulness. Healing. Yeah. What else? Contentment. Yeah. There's a hand in the back. Tension? Yeah. Something is going on. There's tension. Yeah. Anything else? Biofeedback. Yeah. I like that.
I'm here.
Hmm?
I'm here.
I'm here, yes. Community. Yeah. Anyone resonated with the words that you've heard so far? I see your show of hands. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that hasn't been named?
Fatigue.
Fatigue. Yeah, we're noticing our fatigue. That's right. What else?
Feels like time has stopped.
Time has stopped. Anyone else experience that? Yeah. So in this presence, as we experience this, what if from this space we can listen to another person? If it feels peaceful, if we're fatigued, of course we might need to more sleep, or if we're tense, to find ways to relax. But what if there's a sense of presence and a sense of peace, and we would listen to another person this way? So the last exercise we're going to do, just for a few minutes, you're going to pair up with someone, and here's what we're going to do for a few minutes. One person talks, and you can talk about anything you want. And you're just going to talk. And the other person, the listener, just practice presence. Just practice being energetically. Sometimes when we listen, what do? We kind of nod and yes, I get it, or respond. What if we don't do that and we can just be present energetically and see how this feels, and then we'll switch. So can you pick up a dyad? Can you pick up a person? Be someone you know, someone you don't know. Let's see how this feels. So I'll give the timing. So decide who's the listener and who's the talker. And just be aware of the body, of the energy and the presence. Everyone ready? All right. Raise your hand if you're going to be the listener now. Who's the listener right now? All right. All right, well, let's get going. Let's see how it goes. Play with it and see what you discover. All right, it's time to wrap up and thank your listener and your person who shared. And I'm aware that we are a minute or a couple of minutes away from our break. I'll have to stop, but any questions, and of course I'll be available for questions afterwards. I don't want to take all your break time, but any questions? There's maybe a couple.
Okay. I'm a massage therapist and acupuncture physician, and the token alternative medicine person here, I believe. But I've been doing massage for 42 years. And what I like very much what you said, that there is actually a physical, we're a unity. We're not we don't have a psychological self and a physical self and a spiritual self. We're all one self. We kind of divide them up here, but I don't think that that's really true. And there are physical manifestations to emotional states that's called affect. And I run into that all the time when I'm working with people. If someone stays in a physical position too long, they get stuck in it. So if somebody has chronic depression, they take on a physical posture of depression. And I think it's very, very important that if someone has a chronic emotional state, that they get body work in order to help them get out of that chronic state, because the body has reacted to it and it will get stuck there. It will reach a homeostasis in that particular mode of being.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Just continuing on the previous thought, I think most of you here are aware that by using physical exercise techniques, they can also heal the psyche and soul. And for example, aerobic exercise was found to have the same healing results as antidepressants. So we are a unity. Okay, 2 questions for your presentation. The very short one, the first one is very short. Is what we did in exercise 1 a kind of meditation?
Contemplation. The question is this a kind of meditation? I think we can call it in different ways. I particularly appreciate, I believe it's St. Nicephorus in one of Philokalia when he talks, how do we call it? We call it watchfulness, contemplation, we call it meditation. We can call it in all sorts of ways, but it's one experience. So this experience of being inward and being aware, so we can have a different, our tradition is filled with contemplating practices. I think that's a term that usually in our faith we use. Other people use meditation. We can go into a discussion about what the difference, I wanted to just stay with just the actual experience.
Okay, thank you very much. And the second question, it's like a comment actually. I think you said before when the therapist, when God is present into a therapy, then healing takes place. But sometimes I think this is not the case. For example, there might be a therapist who is faithful and the patient who is faithful, but healing doesn't happen. And in other cases, when none of them is faithful and the healing happens. So it's not always the case. I think, of course, faith facilitates healing, but it's not always the case that healing will happen, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I would totally, like faith is important, but there are skills. So there's skillful ways of healing others. In the same way you go to a doctor, right? Some doctors are more skillful than others, and you can get better quicker, right, if they're faithful or not. Yes, there are also skillful techniques that can help people heal on top of that, of course. Yeah. Yes. All right. The sign is we have to stop. So thank you so much, and then we'll have a wonderful break.